this is Karen Johnson, and this is another one of our Proctors history videotapes. Today's date is September 23rd, 2013, and we're very pleased to have Julie Burgess with us here today. And Julie was a very, very early member of the governing committee and also a president of Proctors. So if you think back, even just when you moved to Schenectady, what were your early memories of Proctors?
My memories were pretty dim of Proctors when we first moved here. It was just for the movies, of course. And it reminded me of the theaters I'd seen in Detroit where I grew up, where I spent my teenage years. And Proctors was very much the same. Beautiful theater.
And then about the time that the theater was about to go into foreclosure, were you involved in the efforts to try and form acts and form a board? And
not at the very beginning. There was a lot of interest, of course, and a lot of publicity and a lot of hope that Proctors would not get demolished or worse. I had been president of the Arts Council in Schenectady and involved with some other performing arts groups, and so I was among those who were definitely interested. The first I heard that this group was being formed was when Marty Moore called me, and I think she was the one that was significantly the most involved in getting everything started from the beginning. She deserves most of the credit for pulling that initial group together. I was not among the original incorporators. I think there were 4 or 5 of them. Mm-hmm. I couldn't even name them now. But then when they got ready to form the board, that's when I got the call, and I was delighted.
So that was pretty early on.
It was. It was. Nothing had really happened yet except for the incorporation papers.
So that was in 1977, if I remember, which I've had a little opportunity to brush up on a few of these dates.
That's not fair.
And it was, the first show was in 79, so between that time, ACTS actually took over the ownership of the theater.
That's right, and there was just so much to do in the beginning. It was amazing that we got it off the ground at all.
So when the ACTS board was formed, what were they doing and thinking about? Were they trying to figure out how to manage? I mean, what were they working on?
Well, in the first place, just let me say that there were all kinds of people on this board. It was really interesting, with all different experience. We had lawyers and bankers and somebody who had experience working with unions and people in the performing arts and a wide variety. And the first thing that we had to be concerned with was the building itself, because you really couldn't do much with it in its current state. I mean, the roof was leaking and it was dirty and it was just a mess, and we had no money. So the two concerns really were money and getting the building in shape enough so that we could invite the public in.
Do you have any recollection of how much work was done with this? I know Marty tells about a lot of cleaning and things.
Oh my goodness, yes. And I can remember bringing my whole family down one weekend to rip up the old carpet because we were being given a new one. And everybody was down there pulling out the carpet.
So who all from your family came down?
I think everybody who was home at the moment.
And what did how'd you get this up?
I mean, we just literally pulled. It was, I think, pasted to the floor in some way. Yeah, but that was just one example of all the things we did. I mean, there were people cleaning and people cleaning the chandeliers, that huge chandelier that comes down from the ceiling, and just doing everything. And we were fortunate that at that time there was, I can't remember the details, but there was some kind of a federal program to help the unemployed, and it was called
CETA.
That's right. CETA, Schenectady, something training.
Economic.
Something. Anyway, we had some people from there, especially a cleaning man, I remember. So we had trouble with vagrants in the building too. We'd come in the morning and find the brown paper sack with a bottle in it.
Oh.
And so on.
So it was quite exciting in the
early days. Oh, it was very exciting. In fact, one of these cleaning men, I don't know if I should say this, but he put up a sign in the arcade saying, "No pee in the arcade."
Did everyone obey him?
So we found everything in the arcade. Let's see, what else shall I talk about? Well, we fortunately had a couple of donations, one fairly significant, that helped us get started in the very beginning. We had no paid staff. Everything was done by volunteers. And it was a big risk, and we all knew that. But it was so exciting, it just kept us going.
And then there were a group of people that decided you needed to have a demonstration season?
Well, we figured we sort of should start small. I think we had maybe, was it 4 shows the first season?
4 or 5, I'm not sure.
Yeah, beginning in January.
So when you went to the opening night of Blackstone, what were you doing that night? You just bought a ticket?
No, I didn't buy a ticket. I was doing something. What was I doing? I think I was taking tickets, actually, that night.
So you were a volunteer?
Oh, yes. Everybody was a volunteer.
Were you aware of the water flowing down the...
Well, not immediately, but it didn't take long before just about everybody was aware.
We're getting many versions of this story. Of course, Dennis's is the most dramatic.
I bet.
So the demonstration season was a success?
It was. Well, it was certainly a success with the public. Financially, I wish I could remember numbers, but I think that we did okay. We were still alive at the end of the demonstration season. But then came the chore of deciding what to do next and where the money was coming from to continue to work on the theater to make it presentable.
So was this about the time that some paid staff members were brought on?
I remember my daughter worked in the box office for a while, one of my daughters, and she was paid, I think. She started out as a volunteer, and then I think she had some pay. And of course, the cleaning people were paid. Mary Ann Lamel served as the director for a while, but she was not paid. I can't remember exactly when Dennis came on as a paid staff person, but he must have been the first.
So then a group of the board started, again, watching parts of the project, like booking shows. And what part of all that were you involved in? Were you...
I remember volunteer recruiting a lot and writing grant proposals.
Oh, that would
I
be
wrote
your
lots
total
of grant
niche,
proposals.
because you had a lot of experience with that.
And kind of helping get the office organized. And I served as a volunteer usher for 15 years, I think.
Wow. Because there were some rather large grants written to the Endowment for the Arts and also
I
the
did
New York
that.
State Council on the Arts. And,
some we got and some we didn't.
well,
The New York State Council on the Arts generally supported us pretty well. The National Endowment, that flunked. We didn't get that one.
well, later they did get something.
Yeah, but the one I wrote didn't fly.
Well, don't you think sometimes writing grants, it's a matter of trying different approaches and getting to have the people on the other end know you a little bit?
I'm sure that has something to do with it, but we also had to have a track record, I think. I had to establish that.
So money, not that much, but some is starting to flow in,
A little bit.
and the shows are going off well.
But you don't always know which ones are going to be successful in the pocketbook, even though, and deciding how much to charge. How do you know what to charge?
So
That
how do
was
you
very
think that
difficult.
people thought about that? What were the things that came into their...
Well, I wasn't really a part of that, so I can't say for sure. But it was mostly, I'd say trial and error played a large part of it.
So you got to be president at some point of this board.
I did, didn't I?
Yes, indeed. And do you remember what were the issues when you were the president?
Oh, one
Or
of the
some
big
of them.
issues at that particular time, this was, what, about 3 years after we got going, maybe, was the issue of what was called the 400 block. And this was a group of business people doing business in the block which centered around Proctors. which happened to be the 400 addresses. And they hired a consultant an architect actually, from Washington, D.C. to come up and help them plan how to make this block more attractive and get more business. And one of the things that was part of this plan was a pond with some shrubbery and whatnot, and a canal. Thus, it was called Canal Square. And the canal, part of the canal, went right behind the theater. I mean, right smack dab up against it. And we didn't own anything beyond the back wall, so there's nothing we could do about that. And the loading dock was out there. So everything was between the theater and the truck was this canal. So they said, oh, not to worry, we'll build a bridge. Okay, we'll build a bridge. But then they decided that it would be nice to have paddle boats in the canal. But to have paddle boats with people in them, the canal bridges would have to be humped like this, which obviously isn't terribly satisfactory when you're loading in and out lots of equipment and scenery and whatnot. So this made us pretty disturbed, and we were negotiating, and we finally lost out on that one. But I remember one day after a board meeting walking out the arcade with some folks, and I think it was Art Govero. I was grumbling. Art Govero turned to me and he said, well, don't worry, even the Erie Canal got filled in eventually. And of course it did, and this one did too.
He was prophetic.
He was indeed.
But I remember those because in the winter they'd get icy.
That was
and
terrible.
It was very dangerous.
It was.
And there were 3 ways of getting in the theater all over
The canal.
these bridges.
I think the Washington architect didn't realize what winter was like in Schenectady.
Well, he also didn't realize that making the canal out of swimming pool material did not guarantee its life expectancy was long enough, and after a few seasons it began to leak. And at that point, the 400 block had some financial reverses, and they couldn't afford to fix it. So
it all worked out eventually.
Yeah, so the board was grappling with those issues, but because you didn't own the land, you just owned up to the building, and the rest was in either the public right-of-way.
Exactly. And of course, there had been a street there.
Yeah.
Smith Street was there, which is gone now.
So that must have been quite stressful.
It was rather.
So how were the shows going during that time? Were they breaking even? Or?
As I recall, it was a mixed bag. Some did extremely well and others didn't do so well. I think the kinds of shows that we had in the beginning are very different from what we have now. And they were maybe a little less of what you would call pop today. Not sure I could describe that accurately. I think we had hoped for a little more classical music and theater, but we found that was terribly expensive. And even raising the prices didn't make that feasible.
So in the end, you had to seek the more pop shows as well. And there got to be, certainly when Dennis was there, a great variety of shows and some incredible shows. Yo-Yo Ma, I mean.
Yeah, well, Yo-Yo Ma was, I don't know how we did that, but that was foolish in hindsight, because somebody like that is very expensive, just terribly expensive. And the ticket prices just didn't do it.
Do you remember whether in the beginning most of the people who were coming to the theater were from Schenectady, or do you have any sense who was really coming here?
I think we found to our surprise that people were coming from all over. Even though the people who were the volunteers were primarily Schenectady and the donors were primarily Schenectady, the audience was very widespread.
Now, you didn't have computer-managed databases or anything exciting like that, did you?
No.
Because in my history of working at Proctors, I've come across a few card files that
Oh,
looked
yes.
like.
Yeah, of course everybody used card files. Yeah, and selling tickets was You know, you couldn't look at a computer and see, well, we've got these seats vacant tonight. Would you like, you know?
Do you remember, could people call on the phone and order tickets, though? I don't even remember how much credit cards were used at that time.
Gee, I don't either. Well, they were used, I'm sure, but I think most of it was walk-up and limited hours, and it took us a while to figure out what worked.
Now, do you remember anything about our relationship to the Carl Company, or?
Mr. Carl was very generous, very generous. He did not only the carpet, but I believe the curtain.
Apparently,
I want to check me out on that, but I'm pretty sure.
The carpet was donated by someone who at Mohasco
Oh.
in Amsterdam, who lived in Niskuna.
Oh, that's right. He was on the board, but I don't remember his name.
And I don't
Okay,
know
it
how
must
they
have been
got
the
it.
curtain that Carl.
The legend that I've heard is that the women from Carl Company in the drapery department sewed the whole curtain,
I didn't
which
know
is
that.
still the curtain we have
Yes,
today.
it's beautiful.
Quite. Do you remember anything about the workings of backstage and what went on back there? You may not, but
Well, Jim Lamel was sort of the expert and some of the people who had theater experience, like Art Govro. Remember, there were problems. There were troubles, and getting everything to work properly. The lighting board. A lot of people spent a lot of time on that. And then, of course, there was the organ. Volunteers did that.
that must have been purchased around the time you were president, wasn't
It
it?
must have been right around there. That was a very exciting thing to have happen.
Do you know any of the backstory on how we got that?
I did at the time, but unfortunately, my memory doesn't serve me well enough to repeat all the details.
Because it came someplace
It
from
came
the
from
Midwest.
yes, I think maybe Ohio. That was a lucky find.
It was.
It
And it
was,
was
and-
lucky that the Golub family wished to participate in it.
And it was also lucky that we had so many people here who were not only interested but capable of taking care of it, repairing it, and playing it. And they still do.
Do you remember if there were organ concerts early on?
Yes, there were some. And organs with movies. With movies sometimes.
And there were quite a few movies shown at the theater?
I don't think there were. Not in the
I'm
beginning.
trying to remember, there
can't-
was a program of movies. They were quite inexpensive
Oh, yes.
and quite well attended, but
Yeah.
I couldn't remember when they started.
I can't either, to be sure.
Because Bob Warlock was involved in.
He was the one who
That.
really got that off the ground.
So if we want to find out, we've got to talk to
Have to
him, I
talk to
guess. It's pretty hard to remember what happened in what year.
Oh, it
when-
is. It was a while ago.
Because you come to Proctors quite a bit, and you know what it is today, and you know what happened before, but what happened in the middle is sometimes hard to interpret, because
Well,
it just progressed.
It did. But then we had our tough spots, too. We put on a lot of fundraisers. And I think that anyone who's involved in fundraising knows that it takes a lot of work to make any money on a fundraiser. It's a lot of work. And we didn't get into more formal fundraising till pretty much, I think, after I was president, before it really got going.
You mean just asking people for money or memberships?
Well,
or-
a well-organized fundraising project.
Well, then they did have the telethon for the $1 million. It was probably after.
I think that was later, a
Yeah.
little bit later.
That was
We had
very
a
successful.
dance. What was that? Some kind of a dance thing
There was
at one of the schools, wasn't it?
Well, there was a dance marathon, and fortunately, we had Betty Apkarian here to tell us about that.
Oh, good.
So we've documented that, and
I do remember
I think
that.
that came quite a bit later. But it's certainly true that all these things happen, and You're not sure what the order was?
Well, that's true, yes. It's hard to remember sometimes.
So Jim Delmonico was on the board or
Mm-hmm.
and helping the theater. Jim was the general manager at WRGB Channel 6.
Yes, he was, and he helped us get publicity.
So there
He
were a
was
lot
valuable that way. So many of the people on the board had some special connection that was really valuable. For instance, Mr. Carl was on the board. This gentleman from Mohasco that you mentioned, Landgraf, was that his name?
Stanley Landgraf, I believe.
People had their little ins that were very valuable. That's the way the world turns, I guess, but we were fortunate
Well,
that
there
way.
was definitely a sense that the community was coming together around this project.
Yes, yes. Everybody was very happy about it. And the audiences were good. Publicity was good.
And Audrey Hughes was working here.
Yes, Audrey was our PR person.
So there was a small staff as time went on.
Yeah, oh yeah. The staff did increase. We had some clerical staff. I do remember, but I can't remember the order in which the staff came. Most of the bookkeeping was done by a banker on the board, Mr. Eldon Springstead. He did the bookkeeping for a long time.
He actually did the bookkeeping? Interesting, I didn't know that.
Then he set it up so that staff could take it on. He was really in charge of the process.
Interesting. Do you remember there was an auditor, oh, now I'm losing his name, but he was with Marvin and Company, and the theater needed an audit, and he said he did the first one free, and he told his partners that they should keep helping Proctors because it was really important. So there were an awful lot of people who came forward to try and survive
That's true.
the
There
theater.
were. It was
So-
amazing. Yeah, and Dennis was a real galvanizer. I think he had the whole town of Scotia practically coming to work here.
Well, that's good.
He knew how to get people. And
That's
Marty
good.
too, yeah.
Was there anything else you'd like to chat about?
Well, I'd like to say that it was an exciting thing to do. I think it was the best volunteer experience I ever had, without a doubt. And the best part, I think, was meeting the people. Because so many of those people I never would have met under any other circumstances, and it was,
The people who worked on the theater.
yeah, it was really great.
There was a lot of esprit de corps, wasn't
Oh,
there?
there was. Yes, there was. And we never could have possibly imagined what Proctors would be like today. Never.
It's great, though, isn't it?
But it makes us feel good that it worked out. It is.
Well, Proctors is very fortunate to have had that kind of support.
It wouldn't have happened without it.
Right. Well, Julie, thank you so much for coming in today.
Very welcome,
And we
Karen.
hope that people who see this will appreciate the wonderful history of Proctors Theater and also your contribution to it.
Thank you.
Thanks.